think the court really has an opportunity to update the Constitution and make it say what they'd like it to say. I know we've seen a bit of a revival in the idea of the progressive legal movement that people in the early 20th century advocated views for changing America. They felt the Constitution often blocked them from doing that, and they were very aggressive in seeking ways to subvert or get around that Constitution. Your former colleague at University of Chicago, Richard Epstein, said any constitutional doctrine that stood in the way of the comprehensive social or economic reforms, he's referring to the progressives, had to be rejected or circumvented. And he noted that the progressive influence continues to exert itself, he's talking about today, long past the New Deal in modern Supreme Court decisions that address questions of federalism, economic liberties, and takings for public use. I believe that's a dangerous philosophy. I believe that's a philosophy not justified by any judge on the court. And I'm worried about the trends. I think the American people are. Greg Craig, the former chief counsel to President Obama, who's known you for some time, I understand, said of you, she is largely a progressive in the mold of Obama himself, close quote. Do you agree with that?
Well, Senator Sessions, I'm not quite sure how I would characterize my politics, but one thing I do know is that my politics would be, must be, have to be completely separate from my judging. And I agree with you to the extent that you're saying, look, judging is about considering a case that comes before you, the parties that comes before you, listening to the arguments they make, reading the briefs they file, and then considering how the law applies to their case. How the law applies to their case. Not how your own personal views, not how your own political views might suggest, anything about the case, but what the law says, whether it's the Constitution or whether it's a statute. Now, sometimes that's a hard question, what the law says, and sometimes judges can disagree about that question, but the question is always what the law says. And if it's a constitutional question, it's what the text of the Constitution says, it's what the history says, the structure, the president, but what the law says, not what a judge's personal views.
I agree, but the point I was just wanting to raise with you is that this idea, this concept of legal progressivism is afoot. I noticed E.J. Dionne in yesterday's Washington Post had an article, started off, second paragraph is saying, Democratic senators are planning to put the right of citizens to challenge corporate power at the center of their critique of an activist conservative judging, offering a case that has not been fully aired since the great progressive era of Justice Louis Brandeis. And I think we do have this national discussion going on about a revival of progressivism. Let me ask you about this. Vice President Biden's chief of staff, Ron Klain, who served on chief counsel of this committee, skilled lawyer, was chief of staff to Vice President Gore also, I believe, who's known you for a number of years, said this about you. Elena Kagan is clearly a legal progressive. I think Elena is someone who comes from the progressive side of the spectrum. She clerked for Judge Mikva, clerked for Justice Marshall, worked in the Clinton administration, in the Obama administration. I don't think there's any mystery to the fact that she is, as I said, more progressive role than not, close quote. Do you agree with that?
Senator Sessions, it's absolutely the case that I have served in 2 Democratic administrations, and I think...
No, but I'm asking, do you agree with the characterization that you are a legal progressive?
Senator Sessions, I honestly don't know what that label means. I've worked in 2 Democratic administrations. Senator Graham suggested yesterday, and I think he's right, that you can tell something about me and my political views from that. But as I suggested to you, that my political views are one thing.
Well, but I agree with you, exactly, that you should not be condemned for being a political believer and taking part in the process and having views. But I'm asking about his firm statement that you're a legal progressive, which means something. I think he knew what he was talking about. He's a skilled lawyer. He's been in the midst of the great debates of this country about law and politics, just as you have. And so I ask you again, do you think that is a fair characterization of your views? Certainly you don't think he was attempting to embarrass you or hurt you in that process, do you?
I love my good friend Ron Klain, but I guess I think that people should be allowed to label themselves. And that's, I don't know what that label means, and so I guess I'm not going to characterize it one way or the other.
Well, I would just say, having looked at your overall record, having considered those two people who know you very well, I think you have to classify I would have to classify you as someone in the theme of the legal progressive.